So I just got done at the gym, and this question or this comparison was basically floating around in my head as I was working out. My mind was wandering. And that is, should you focus more on releasing singles or albums? And I've gotten asked this question numerous times. And I think the tricky thing is, as time goes on, it's becoming less and less of a black and white answer, right? It can be a very gray area in terms of what the best approach is. In addition to, it really depends on what your objective is, what you're going for, and all these different factors. So that's why there's not really a right or wrong answer, but depending on your situation, there can be a right or wrong answer, basically. Now, I will say for the scope of this video, I'm not going to really be giving a pros and cons to releasing singles and a pros and cons to releasing an album, as much as it depends on your situation, because I feel like if I said, what are the pros and cons of a single versus an album, most artists kind of get the idea, right? When it comes to single, it's a lot easier to manage, marketing's easier, you can release one at a time, it keeps your audience engaged. With an album, obviously, it's a collection of tracks, so if you have a certain idea that's a big idea, then obviously that's a lot easier too. But then obviously in terms of cons, releasing now with the mixing and mastering can be a nightmare sometimes, especially if you want there to be a consistent sonic frequency or spectrum throughout the entire album and some consistencies. It's a lot more work. In addition to, a lot of artists go ghost, so to speak, for a year working on an album. A great example, something like the Glitch Mob took 3 years to make their album Love, Death, Immortality, and was kind of off the radar for a few years, So again, obviously pros and cons to both, but jumping into it, my best advice to a lot of the artists out there is to start from this. What is your overall objective? Now, obviously, I know most artists are like, oh, well, I want to live my dream, right? Playing and performing for different types of people, traveling the world, possibly, making a ton of music, and basically being able to not have a 9-to-5 job or have a day job to support your dream, and basically your music will pay for you. But going more in depth, it really depends. A good example is this. Let's say you want to release your songs, I'll just say that, on a label. Now, most labels don't have time to listen to an album. So if you think about it, it's way more likely for you to release a single or maybe 1 or 2 songs and send those to a label and then see what they say, as opposed to making a full album. Most labels will not listen to a full album right now. And obviously it depends on the label, but most are dealing with singles. Once you get a good following on that label or you get connected with them, then releasing an album, 100% doable. But if you're kind of coming out of the get-go, kind of cold emailing them saying, hey, check out this demo, 1 song is the best way to go. When it comes to a single, you can put way more work into it. You can focus on just that 1 song in terms of the arranging, the mixing, the mastering, the sound design, all the different musical elements that are really important. So in this case, if you want to release on the label, doing a single is always the best way to go. When asked, in addition to Xylan, a very famous electronic DJ music producer, when he was asked, what is the best advice that you would have for somebody who's trying to make it in the DJ world or in the electronic music world, he said, and this goes for other genres too, he said, my best advice is make 1, 2, maybe 3 songs maximum. So almost like a mini album or a single or 2 that demonstrates your unique ability as a producer, your style, your genre, and the way you make music. That way, when a label listens to you, they can focus on that 1 song or those 2 songs as opposed to an entire album, which they're probably going to ignore. So in that case, having a single is the best way to go. Now, when it comes to releasing things independently, like I say, you're like, no, I don't want to do a label. I just want to release things on my own. But when it comes to that, in my opinion, I think an album sometimes is a good way to go, especially if you have a certain scope or spectrum for that album. For example, with me, my debut album was The Light Nearby. What I did was I traveled around the country for 10 months, wrote 10 songs about 10 major cities, each song reflecting that city in musical form. So for me, I knew I was going to release that independently. I didn't want to release it under a label. The genres on that album were all over the place. So I was like, you know what? I want to release this album, The Light Nearby, not as a single because each song is very different, but as an album. It's an entire idea. It's a certain scope. It's a certain spectrum that I want to pack into one awesome musical package. And so I found that going down the album route on that was a lot better than a single. In addition to, people sometimes love listening to an album to hear the breadth of everything. So I remember when I released The Light Nearby, a lot of my fans, a lot of my followers were saying that they loved listening to it because they could hear each city almost in musical form. They could see how Miami was a lot more upbeat than, let's say, Boulder, Colorado. So they were able to see that spectrum on one album, as opposed to release it as a single. It was kind of like jumping around there, right? So depending if you want to release it on a label or not, really does have a certain influence on if you want to do a single or an album. Now, another big thing that becomes really, really tricky, I think, is audience retention. And this depends on what type of person you are. It depends on what type of releases you're doing. So this can get really tricky. But basically, and I heard this in some study, I know how 100% true this is, but you can see average attention span of an adult is less than that of a goldfish. I don't know if that's true, but could be. So even if you are an independent musician, sometimes releasing single after single after single is actually a lot easier to do than releasing a full album, right? You release a single, you put it out there, your fans can digest it. You release it like a single the next month and the next month. And what they're finding is, especially in a lot of studies, is that streaming is now the big thing. It's not about, before it used to be about physical sales, then it used to be about like virtual sales in terms of downloading, an MP3. Now it's more about streaming. So when people want to stream stuff, they're usually more likely to focus on singles than streaming an entire album, right? Especially with people being busy and bouncing around. So when it comes to having that audience retention, singles are really important. Now, maybe you're the type of artist that you focus really on social media, you're very active, you're doing a lot of live shows, you're meeting a lot of people. So for you, maybe it's not as big of a deal to release singles because you're still interacting with your audience in such a way that keeps them engaged, kind of reminds them of who you are, and then you can release an album. A great example of this is an artist named Grizz, who is a blend of jazz and electronic music. He releases one full album, so 10 or 12 tracks every year. And even though he does that, even though it's once a year, that's it, he doesn't really do any singles, except here and there, he's able to do that, yet still retain his audience because he's very active. He does a lot of shows. He's constantly meeting people. He's very, very active on social media, doing different things. So for him, he has found a way to kind of bridge the gap of the benefits of the singles with the benefits of the album by keeping that audience retention rate really, really, really high. Doing different social media techniques, doing different videos, doing different, meet and greets, all these different things. So when it comes to audience retention, which I think is a really, really important factor of singles and albums, that is a massive thing to really think about. Because for most artists out there, obviously, if you think about it, I know it sounds kind of dumb to say, if people don't remember who you are, start forgetting you, it's a lot harder to make money. It's a lot harder to have people listen to your music. And that sounds stupid, but it's something that a lot of people forget about. Something a lot of artists forget about, that they spend 2 or 3 years on an album, but they're not interacting with anybody. They're not engaging with anybody. And granted, maybe that's what you want to do, but remember that people might forget who you are. And even if you think, oh, no one's going to forget who I am, that's your first person viewpoint. Remember, the world is rapidly changing, constantly revolving. So I think when it comes to the single versus album debate, my two main things I really like to focus on, and that's what I want to do this video, is the one, what is your ultimate goal? Are you going to release it independently or through a label? Because that really affects a lot of the scope, in my opinion, of doing a single versus an album. Second thing is audience retention. In my opinion, those are the two biggest factors, because when it comes to releasing an album or a single, a lot of the pros and cons are really musical differences and marketing differences. Marketing being label or independent, marketing being audience retention. And then when it comes to musical differences, every musician out there knows, obviously having an album, mixing mastering is trickier, blah, 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 singles a lot easier, blah, 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 right? I'm not going to go into that. So that's really, I really want to focus on the label and the audience retention. I think those are the two biggest things that you should really be thinking about as an artist. Now, one last thing I want to say, kind of in terms of concluding this video, is one question I'd like to ask you is, well, why not both? This is something Grizz does. Rez did this very recently. She's a female DJ and electronic music producer. She's very talented. And what she did was, for her album Mass Manipulation, she released a song a week. I think she did 4 or 5 songs, or maybe a song every couple weeks. I can't remember how she did. She timed it out, basically, where she was releasing songs off the album as if they were singles, and then on the album release date, released all of them. And this is a really, really good approach, in my opinion. Whether you want to release it independently, which is what she did, or if you want to release it through a label, again, when it comes to a label, make sure you have a good connection, all that kind of stuff. That kind of goes without saying. But when it comes to releasing it in general, if you're worried about audience retention, and that's why right now you're focusing on singles, that is a really good way to go. Make an album, let's say 10 or 12 tracks. Say, you know what, I'm releasing an album soon. Check out my newest single off the album. They can listen to that single, then release one the next month. Maybe do 4 months in a row, you release 4 songs, 1 song every month, and then on the 5th month, you release the entire album. That way, you're able to still keep them engaged. They listen to your single, and they're like, oh man, this is a really, really good song. I can't wait to hear the next one. They hear the next one, then they hear the next one, and then all of a sudden you're like, you know what, I've released 4 singles off my album. Now I want to release a full album. Here it is. And by that point, it also is really good marketing, in my opinion, because now you've already picked up steam. If those singles are good, which obviously that's the most important thing, make sure whatever you release is going to be good. Now you've already built up steam where people are like, wow, like I'm really excited to see this full album. These first 4 singles were fire. These first 2 or 1 was fire. I cannot wait to hear the entire album. And so that's a really good way to kind of bridge, in my opinion, the whole label versus, the whole album versus single debate, because now you're kind of going in the middle. You're getting the best benefits of singles, the best benefits of the album, and kind of combining the 2 approaches together. So I really hope you guys like this video. I know I kind of jumped around a lot, and the main reason why, at least for me, is that when it comes to this question, like I said in the beginning, it is not a black or white answer. There's a lot of gray area, especially, like I said, if you want to release on a label, if you want to release independently, if you want to go for high honest retention, but if you're balancing that out in a different approach, there's so many different factors that come into play. Not even to mention, if, let's say, you're on a budget and you need to hire a mastering engineer and they charge you $100 a track, well, $1,000 for, like, say, an entire album is a lot a lot more expensive than $100 for one single, and you can focus on that one single if you're on a budget, right? So there's so many different factors that come to play with this, but I really hope you guys like this video. I just want to make it and kind of give you a lot of different perspectives, a lot of things to throw at you to kind of keep everything in mind, because, like I said, depending on your approach, every situation is different, and depending on each artist, depending on where they are and what they're doing, a single or an album may be the best way to go depending on who you are. But basically, I really hope you guys like this video, and overall, to kind of conclude this, remember that at the end of the day, the most important thing is, 1, what your creative approach is, and 2, making really good music.